Civium, ideas que liberan.
Muy buenos días a todos, aquí Reynaldo Vélez, estoy aquí con una nueva iniciativa, Civium Podcast, ¿verdad?
Reynaldo Vélez, aquí del futuro, editamos el principio de este debut por razones técnicas, pero como quiera que sea, aquí va a estar Jaime Zapata, Dorsia Smith y Hector Mercado. Vamos a estar discutiendo el libro de la profesora Dorsia, In Inheritance of Drowning, un poemario que contiene mucho contenido político y social, así que disfrútenselo y volvemos al pasado. Esto fue grabado en diciembre.
Queremos iniciar presentando el libro In Inheritance of Drowning de la profesora Dorsia Smith de la UPR Río Piedra, que tiene un doctorado en literatura y lengua en el Caribe. Estoy con mi co-host Jaime Zapata.
¿Cómo estamos, gente?
Y el profesor Hector Mercado de la UPR Río Piedra.
Muchos saludos.
So to begin, I like you, Dorsia, because we're going to have to speak English today. As the poem is written in English, it should be discussed in English. So I'd like you, to present yourself and tell us about the process in writing and what inspired you to write this piece, as it contains a lot of politics in it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Reynaldo and Jaime, and thank you so much to Professor Hector Mercado from the UPR Rio Piedras campus for joining me today. It's a pleasure to be here with this podcast. I wrote this book, In Inheritance of Drowning, because I think many of us were deeply impacted by Hurricane Maria. So that took place in 2017, but we're still feeling the effects today because of Hurricane Maria. So Hurricane Maria frames the book, but I wanted to also show for the book the racial, social, and political injustices that are happening in the United States and how Puerto Rico is directly impacted because of those injustices. So when I started out with the book, I said, okay, I'm going to frame it with the bookends of Hurricane Maria. So the book begins with poems about Hurricane Maria. It ends with poems of Hurricane Maria. And in the middle, that's when you have how Puerto Rico has been affected by many, many, many different social injustices, political injustices, racial injustices that are occurring in the United States. So I hope, my goal is that after you read the book, there'll be a big push for social transformation. There'll be a discussion about how Puerto Rico, even though on paper it says we are a territory, but we function really as a colony. And we'll have a discussion about these environmental impacts and how we all need to be more conscious about global warming and how it affects not only Puerto Rico, but really the world. And I think people are beginning to take notice of that. Why? Because the United States had 2 major hurricanes this hurricane season. Before that, people were thinking, well, that just happens elsewhere. Now that it's happening to many pockets of the United States more frequently and with more intensity, people are now recognizing, wait a minute, hurricanes can be quite devastating. We should maybe think about our global impact as humans. So I'm hoping when you finish reading this book, you'll think about all those issues and be ready for a social transformation.
So we're going to be discussing 3 of the poems in this book today. But before we start with the poem discussion and use it as a vehicle to discuss other political issues, I'd like you all, if you have anything to ask to the professor before we start in the presentation.
I had a question. Since you're a professor, and most professors, want to bring something to the students and want to imply a certain type of thinking moment in students, what do you want to accomplish specifically in the students and their way of thinking and their way of seeing our government and the way of seeing the situation that are happening in the United States in comparison to what we went through with Hurricane Maria?
Yes. Well, one thing I want us all to be aware of, professors as well as students, community extended from the UPR, is to really think about our connection to nature. Sometimes we don't think about that. Like when we have a bottle of water, I notice at the UPR in particular, there's not a lot of, bins to recycle. And many people are thinking, well, I'll just throw that out, but then it builds and builds and builds. So it's to have a greater consciousness. Like for instance, I'm just gonna take Canada as an example. When I was in Toronto, I saw everywhere receptacle containers for recycling. People were really conscious because there was like a movement of, oh, you're brushing your teeth. Do you really need to have the water running when you brush your teeth? So you start thinking, okay, I'm going to save water. I'm going to put this in the recycling bin. And then you start thinking, well, do I even need this plastic container? I should maybe just have, a metal container and refill my water bottle, or my metal container with this instead of just keep buying more and more plastic. So one is to get us to be more conscious. I hope my students recognize that when they finish taking class with me, to be more conscious about our environmental impact and our connection with the environment, especially since we're an island. You have other islands that are disappearing. And we have, unfortunately, so much waste product. So if we could think about how can we reduce that waste product. The other thing I want us to think about when people are thinking about, well, I'm going to leave Puerto Rico because there are no jobs here. Thinking about the impact, though, what we have, our relationship with the United States. If we had a different political system, if we had more of a push for job innovation, maybe we could retain some of the youth. Maybe then people would start thinking, well, I can raise my family here. Things in Puerto Rico are improving. There could be this big push for, I'm going to stay in mi isla because that's my home. Many people are feeling, well, I have to leave because I can't afford to stay in Puerto Rico. So I'm hoping, too, after reading this book, more people will have a mindset of what can I do to help Puerto Rico? So that we don't have to leave. We don't have to then say, well, wait a minute, we have this, this law, we have this Act 60. What can we do to try to, either abolish those laws or just straight out say, we're going to start a new movement right now, right here, where we get rid of all this because we have to look out for those that are here.
But we have to start.
We have to start. And the time is when? I would tell my students, the time is now. It's been now for a long time, but the time is now. We can't just keep waiting and say, another year, the next, 4 years, the next time we elect a new governor. No, we have to do it right now.
I loved how you put that the Hurricane Maria accident was like a cover-up for all the bad things of the government, and now we're fixing that, and now it's the time, honestly. And now when all these hurricanes are happening in the United States, we're looking a little bit more as what actually is happening and what's actually have in Puerto Rico. I love that comparison.
Thank you, Jaime.
So, Hector, if you have any thoughts or any comments you want to make before we start delving into the conversation.
Well, I was thinking just about the times just before Maria, and I remember the ashes in Peñuelas. I don't know if any of you remember about that. I mean, it was a very controversial matter, and then Maria hit us, and all of a sudden. I haven't heard about that particular subject ever since. So
I was saying it was a cover-up.
Yeah, exactly.
It worked as a smokescreen to many things that were happening. It got the attention elsewhere, and we forgot about some other problems that were running at the same time. So let's start with the poems.
Okay.
And let's start discussing politics. Well, we're already warmed up, but let's start doing that. And I like... it's for it to be you who presents the Drowning in 5 parts, at least that first part of the poem.
Oh, sure.
Which is, I think, very important, and it deserves a lot of discussion.
Oh, thank you. So the poem is actually a little lengthy, so I'll just read the first part, and it's called Drowning in 5 parts. We have always been drowning, with sweat, with fear, with debt. How much for your freedom? It's a trick question. You can never pay enough. You will always owe someone or something. Haiti paid France $30 billion for its independence. Puerto Rico, how much can I pay? U.S., give us your land, people, language, food, culture, and flag. Maybe then we'll talk. Puerto Rico, no es justo. U.S., take it or leave it. Our dreams are free. We run like stray horses in the mountains. No light for good luck. Who needs it anyway, when there's no want of stars to give us lifeblood? Sometimes, every so often, a tourist drowns behind a hotel in Condado. The ocean reclaims what it wants, saying, here is salt. Take that back in your suitcase. How cruel, how unkind, what does it come to?
Excellent. So,
Chills.
thoughts on when you wrote this poem, your inspiration, of course, like always, and if you want to highlight any particular subject, because there's a lot of content in this one page.
Well, the poem really started when people were talking about Puerto Rico and its independence and what could Puerto Rico do to get its independence. And the conversation centered around, well, we can just ask the United States for its independence. And I thought, well, that's not going to happen. That's a really naive perspective. You just go and say, like, hey, Mr. President or Mrs. President, whoever's going to be in office at that moment, we want our freedom, make us independent, And I said, it's going to come at some kind of cost. Either it's going to be like a big financial cost and or social cost, So I started thinking of places that, you look at the freedom, right? And you think, well, this is what they had to pay for that. And I immediately thought of Haiti. And I said, Haiti wanted its freedom. France said, okay, but this is what you're going to have to pay us. Yep. And the equivalent today would be, even with inflation, and probably even more than what's in the book, right? But it's $30 billion. And then you look at Haiti and you wonder, well, what then happened to Haiti? It got its freedom, but look out. Unfortunately, it's been very unstable. It's had so many political issues. You have a high proportion of people in poverty. Unfortunately, there is also a high illiteracy rate. But you think, well, why is that? And it was because they had to pay so much to France that they never were able to recover that. And then for the environmental factors, they ended up having to clear away a lot of their land for deforestation. They were, trying to sell whatever they could. So now what happens when you have a lot of heavy rain, you have landslides, that leads then to more people losing their home, more people pushed into poverty. So I thought, well, if we're going to use, for instance, Haiti as an example, then what's going to happen to Puerto Rico? Are we ever then going to really then be, I put this in quotes, free when you're trying to then, make up all that you've had to pay? And then you think, okay, well, if we became ever, because the conversation then shifted into what if Puerto Rico became a state? And then I said, well, have you looked at Hawaii? What has happened with Hawaii? I had the privilege of going there, and beautiful, yes, but our tour guide was so honest. And our tour guide said, we have to fight to keep our indigenous land. We have to fight to keep our language. Culture. We have to fight to keep our culture. And we are a minority here. And I thought, well, that could be Puerto Rico, where what happened to Spanish? What happened to the native Puerto Ricans, right? The natives, where are they? And then you're starting to look at what's happening with Act 60. There's a lack of affordable housing. Certain pockets of Puerto Rico are being, occupied by, I put this in quotes, those that are wealthy and foreign who have allegedly come here to help Puerto Rico. But then you wonder, what are they really helping? In the sense that we, don't have always the access to those pockets. I'm thinking of certain beaches, which they're trying to privatize, certain areas. We were in Ocean Park recently, and there are now some gates. Some gates there. And I thought, well, this used to be open some years ago. Well, what happened? So it's couched under, the rules of security. These are the residents now. Yep. But then you think, well, years ago, it used to be open. It used to be for everyone. So what's happening? And then if you think of this is what's happening now, imagine then what happened if we became a state and you have this big influx of other people, and the native Puerto Ricans will be probably pushed out. And so I started writing this poem thinking about all of those issues and how, again, this colonial relationship that we have with the United States, it keeps us in such a precarious situation. So I thought, yes, for so long we have been drowning. And I thought with sweat, with fear, and now with this debt, a debt that, in many ways is not rightfully ours. And then I thought, okay, if we ever did get its freedom, it's going to come at such a high price, and it's not going to be fair. No es justo. And the U.S., take it or leave it, because that really has been so much of the attitude that we've had with so many politicians and this colonial relationship with the United States. The end of the poem is a turn into those that come to Puerto Rico, and there are so many warnings that happen every year, especially in Condado with the beaches. Don't swim. There's a red flag. Don't go in the water. But every year, people disregard that. They go in and people drown. And so I thought, we're not taking the environment seriously. We're not heeding the warnings. And then there's also the arrogance, too, of others coming in to Puerto Rico thinking, well, I know what's best for Puerto Rico.
True. Yes, it's like a metaphor to say, well, I know what's best for you, but you don't live here and you're coming here and telling me, well, this is how things are supposed to be done, and it doesn't work like that. And so we have a topic that's throughout the entire poem, that's colonialism, and it's highlighted here. And more than colonialism, it's colonialism as in the way that you explained that colonialism as an effect of imperialism. So we have the comparison between Haiti. We can make a comparison between Kenya. I was reading a lot about Kenya lately.
Yes.
And Kenya, when it got its independence, the lands that the British had taken, so were sold back to Kenya, and the loans were given sometimes by British banks.
And they paid by blood too.
And they paid by blood as well. So about colonialism and imperialism, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the poem, the rest of you, and see what you have to add or ask.
I love this poem. When I read it, I was like,
you.
wow. Because the comparison with the water, with the drowning, for me, it was so special because I'm starting to surf. I'm not going to say I'm a surfer yet because I can barely stand up, right? But my cousins, they all surf, and they always tell me, hey, when you go into the waters, when you go into Ocean Park, you have to go with somebody that's from here, that knows the waters. Because right now, you can be in the water, you're chilling, and suddenly you get pulled down.
That's right.
And that's how the accidents happen. Accidents are called accidents because you don't know that they're going to happen. And every time I see more and more people from the U.S. and other countries come here, and they're like, nah, they don't know what they're talking about. I used to go into Miami and the beaches, and then you're like, dude, it's not the same. The water here is very different. And if you disregard our necessities, if you disregard our warnings, the ocean is going to take care of you. You don't have to do much. The same ocean will take care of you. And the same thing here, we're going to have to pay for independence, but not just the independence. We paid for being citizens. The United States told us, you're going to be citizens, but at cost. You're going to fight my wars. You're going to pay my taxes. You're going to pay for certain things that we don't even know why we're paying for them. And then that's the same thing that's going to happen if we try to be independent. And in the poem, it just like mixes it all up into a super easy to comprehend and very special poem. I really loved it. I really enjoyed it.
The U.S. has taken a lot from Puerto Rico, especially throughout those first 50 years of colonialism and the era under the United States flag. They have extracted way more than they have given us, and even after ELA, you could still see that they extract way more than what they live. We have, the American corporations basically took care of our economy completely. Took care of our lands. They took them away. And
look at right now. Right now, in places like my family's from Cabo Rojo, a place that we never thought that people from the U.S. were going to start buying houses in Cabo Rojo, because it's a very Puerto Rican place. There's a lot of culture there. We have Plena, we have Bomba. We kept most of it. But right now, the other day when we went back to Cabo Rojo, because we live over here, and I was like, who are all these people buying my houses? Because in the community, they're rejecting them,
And beginning since the devaluation of our currency when they arrived, we lost our value, the money that we had, we lost it, and as a result, we have to start selling our land, and the economy was aligned to the imperial interests of the United States, in this case, sugar. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Actually, and in Cabo Rojo, I believe that right now there is a huge touristic complex that is being built.
Yeah.
And people are, and this is virgin territory. It's part of our patrimony.
In Cabo Rojo, there's this place called Villa Taína. It's a complex of buildings, but since they got built in the middle of Taíno, what is it called? When they dig them up, the archaeological places. Yes, the archaeological place. So the place had to be called Villa Taína because of the ruins, that's the word I was looking for, the ruins. And then the whole complex, they're called by different Taino and Cacique names, like Guaguimana, Guarionex, and the whole district was called Taino village, and they have symbols, and they're all based, the whole houses, they're based in Taino housing. And now these complexes are coming in, and they're trying to buy some part of of Villa Taina, and they're like, really? Why?
Oh, wow.
That's part of our culture. It's a more futuristic part, right? But they still maintained it. It's so surprising for me how we're letting this happen. Because as Puerto Ricans, we are letting it happen.
Yes, and thanks to these new laws, they don't need anything more than just, for example, an employee to settle in the island and make a corporation out of it, which means that when this happens, first of all, a lot of money is going to go outside the island into the U.S. because they are not full-time residents here on the island, and because they just have to spend X amount of time in the island. They leave. The money leaves with them, and they don't leave quite as much employment as they should because one employee is enough, and they can be their own employee. Then they come, they start buying up the houses, they start buying up the terrains, prices of housing goes up, and we are left to, and the native population is left to rot.
And the nature of those jobs, I mean, that are allegedly created. I mean, it's like, service jobs and low-income jobs. I mean, it's not really adding much to the Puerto Rican economy.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I completely agree with that. You know, the Act 60, everyone's right here in the sense that they come, they're only here for a limited amount of time. They really are not invested in Puerto Rico. They're only thinking of the tax breaks they can get, the financial incentives, and even trying to engage with the local community. They're not really trying to learn Spanish. They're not really watching the news. They're not really reading our newspapers. They're just thinking, well, I'm here for this amount of time. I'm going to have my children, if they decide to bring their children here, they're either homeschool in these little home pods or they're at like the top tier schools that are mostly English speaking schools. So they really only stay with other people from their socioeconomic background. You wanted to say something, Jaime?
It's so funny for me that we go to the United States and they're like, you're in the United States, learn English, but they come here and they don't want to learn Spanish.
Yes, not a word really. And you're right. You know, the jobs that they create with these companies, they're low-income service jobs, and you're thinking, well, how can a person really, live on that salary? And that's really not the goal. And the most that they really invest is, well, they buy a property here, and they're also supposed to make a contribution to a charity, but that's like the bare minimum.
Yes.
You know, and if you look over the amount of time that we've had Act 60, where has it really improved Puerto Rico? I mean, that's what I want to know.
Puerto Rican specifically, because for them it's been great. For us, it's been terrible. So I like to use this because all of this has been practically imposed, right? Act 60 is a produce of our own politicians, but our own politicians are a product of something else, something far wider, something far bigger, of a history of not only corruption, but also oppression on the island, which led to the rise to power of this huge amount of human beings that are selling away our country. However, when it comes to imposition, that's something that imperialism always does. And going back to the end of what we just read, they know what's right for us, but they don't live here. They're not from here. And in that sense, well, there's also the imposition of a worldview, and how that worldview works for others. For example, when the Europeans arrived to America, we had a worldview in the Americas, and the Europeans imposed their worldview, and they devalued that the cultures already existed, and most of them got destroyed. For example, the Taino, which leads to an inheritance of drowning, which is the next poem that I like to discuss.
I will. That's also a poem that
it's a title poem.
Yeah, it's the title poem. Because, in so many ways, unfortunately, we've inherited so many of these injustices, which we should not be responsible for. But it's also a poem that it's the title poem, but it's also a poem that's very close to my heart as well. So I'll read a part of that. I'll read the beginning. In Inheritance of Drowning. They arrived on boats. They arrived well lit our Keke Abuana, punctuated our Arawak ways, walloped our waters, punched down our language until our words got washed, until our tongues got tied, until our tracheas got thick, until we forgot that Columbus was a sore winner and loser. Gold for our drowning, we ran after the holler. The owners arrived in fact-checking hats, demanded we get thrown overboard. Not worth any sorry salt, like we could refuse this shackled cloakroom. No crawl space to moan, we caught our syllables before the currents black-bottomed. Water, water, water. And I'll pause there.
Sure, you don't want to say the rest because it's.
I'll just say the last line. I'll just say the last line.
Please.
Okay. How many ways can we drown? You know the answer. No peeking.
I want to start at the end. No peeking. That was for me like, wow. Do you know the answer? How many ways we can drown? Because that's the first thought I had. No peeking. That means you have an idea. That's the idea you want us to think as students and like analyze is how many ways we can actually drown in Puerto Rico. And I'm like,
yeah. How many ways are we drowning? You know, well, we have, of course, the literal hurricane. Unfortunately, we've had so many people that died, thousands of people that died in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria.
Literally drowning.
Literally drowning. But then you also had people that were suffering from a lack of electricity, a lack of water. I think I mentioned it in the book, but it was almost a year. The last place in Puerto Rico was without electricity. And it was just so shameful that we did not get the aid that we have paid for, that we deserve, and that was even promised. Our politicians said, oh, it's coming, just wait. How much longer are we going to wait? Now the excuses that Luma gives us when the power goes out, we're wondering, well, Luma, you came, you took over Energía Eléctrica, it was supposed to be so much better. Is it really? And this is a foreign company that we're paying a lot of money to have their services. And so then you wonder, well, as we were talking, what are our politicians doing? Are they really helping or hurting us?
I think they're benefiting from the whole situation.
They are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they are. They are, because all the excuses, well, we can't get rid of Luma. Why not? There have been so many interruptions, and there really hasn't been a valid reason for Luma to say, well, we don't have these services here. Oh, we're working on it. It's going to be improved.
And I haven't seen the contract of Luma, right? But when it happened that Autoridad Acueductos y Alcantarillas was privatized twice throughout the 90s, and we recovered it in both occasions. So I have to ask, well, why can't we do the same with Luma? After all, it's the government. It should be helping the citizens.
In the contract, they have certain bylaws that says we can't just break the contract. Why? Because Luma has as a company invested a lot of money in Puerto Rico. But you have to see like a little bit of the background of Luma. Luma, they come here, but they come from Canada. They come from Texas. Texas is a literal plain area. They don't have a lot of mountains. They don't have a lot of like what we have here. That's literally, you have a mountain in Guaynabo. And like, what is this? And you have this in Guaynabo. We have what we call Cantagallo, which is literally where I live. It's a mountain that goes up and then it cuts off in the cantera, and then it has a lot of plain area. So you have things like that here that they weren't expecting. And when they come here, they did invest a lot of money to try to.
But we invested on them as well.
They did, right? But now, if you think about it, in Maria, as we were saying, the last person that had like electricity was a year, but that's constant electricity. Was more than a year.
No, but that's the thing. After Maria, the whole distribution, system was changed, and
it started working.
Exactly, and all of a sudden, Luma takes charge, and we're facing all of these blackouts and power shortages.
We went 10 places forward, 20 paces back.
Yes.
And that's how the government keeps us going. Like we do something well, we do something right, we fix something, and suddenly, oh wait, we have to do something. We have to spend X amount of money on working on this project, and then suddenly we're 20 steps back. Yeah. And that for me is so wrong. Because I work with a company that works with the Department of Familia. We built a program that basically they put all the homes for old people and all the homes for kids, and we are the ones that administrate all of them. And I've seen like the places. I've gone to these places that don't have electricity, that our old people need it. That you need those machines to work. They need the water to bathe. And when you see those things in real life, you get impacted. Like right now, we're doing a charity with la comunidad.
El Hospital del Niño.
El Hospital del Niño. La sociedad a favor del Hospital la Sociedad Hospital Pro Oficial del Niño. Ahora sí, they're changing the name. That's why we're trying to do the correct name. But we've seen the work they do and how much they need electricity to work and function. And when they don't have it, those kids are going without. No? And that kind of hits hard in the heart.
Yeah.
The thing is that the government has a responsibility when it comes to healthcare, and we don't see our government taking care of it. After all, the United States, it's not great on healthcare as it is. The metropolis ain't great on healthcare, at all. But it is even worse in the colony, right? Because we're a colony, and at the end, the state of the colony works in favor of the colonial power itself in most cases. And when it comes to imposition, going back to imposition, I like the way you put it, and you write this, and it reminds me of something that Eduardo Galeano once wrote. When they came in, we had our lens, and they told us to close our eyes, I believe it was, and they gave us the Bibles, and when we opened the eyes, they had our lens, and we had the Bibles. And there's that imposition of what is European civilization. It goes all the way back to when the Spanish arrived. And I think that's really important to understand, right? Maybe we didn't have a coin like the Europeans had. We didn't have many technological advancements that the Europeans had. But we had a culture and we have a way of living. Now, I don't think that in order to improve a continent, you have to enslave it and take its resources and wealth in order to develop a civilization. You could actually have a fair trade or relationship with them. And that wasn't the case in the case of America and the Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, particularly. We are speaking about the Caribbean, right? Although the same could be said for the whole continent. But I want to stay in the Caribbean. And when it comes to us, Puerto Rico, we are literally what's left of the Taino. We are literally what's left of the Taino. Sure. The DNA that's left from the Taino are with us. The United States imposition when the British came was even worse because they were both racially motivated, but in the case of the United States, there was less. The purity of blood was way more important to the point where black people couldn't vote. When they brought them as slaves, they couldn't vote until the 1960s. So in that sense, they were worse. But it was terrible for us as well. And I'd like to speak about it. How do you guys feel with this whole impact of colonialism and European civilization being the way that we're supposed to live our lives? Not that it doesn't have any benefits, because it clearly does, but the way that it was imposed. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that and the conquest of the Americas.
Well, I mean, there's that paternalistic relationship, right? Which, I mean, precisely perpetuates the status quo, the infantilizing of the entire population. I mean, it's rather toxic, to say the least. So, yeah.
Yes, they weren't helpful partners. They were paternalistic, and they took our gold and they created their empire in the back of slaves. And us, even though you wanted to call it encomiendas, they were slaves. The Tainos were slaves.
And in terms of like the collectivity, I mean, we're just, I don't know. I mean, we are not a traumatized. Well, I mean, of course. I mean, there is trauma.
Yes.
I do believe that earlier you were talking about, having like some DNA, Taino DNA. And I do believe that the DNA that we have from the Tainos is actually mitochondrial. which means that it is from the women's, the Taino women, that we get our DNA. Meanwhile, the men, who were first enslaved and later killed, they were just erased.
They basically did erase them.
Yeah,
and if you see the cultural foundings, you found out that most of our DNA comes from the women, just because in that century they killed most of the men after they finished working, and then they stay with the women and rape the women, right? So most of our DNA comes from that. In the United States, they mixed with so many other cultures in the 1960s, 1980s, that they lost most of the Taino DNA that they have. Not us. We kind of stayed after Spanish, after African, after kind of stayed in this combination we have now. So we kind of have the most pure Taino blood out of the all Caribbean.
The problem with the United States, for example, is they were settler colonial states. So when they went, they displaced the native population. And when the Africans come, the Africans they brought them in, but they brought them in as slaves, and they basically raped women. Of course, that happened, but it was prohibited for them to basically get married. There was a lot of racial imposition there. And as for the Native Americans themselves, they were eventually forced into reservations, meaning that the cultural mix that the United States does have, it's mostly of European descent, not Native American descent. So, any last thoughts before we go to the next poem?
I just wanted to mention one thing. The part of the poem that says the owners arrived in fact-checking hats. I just wanted to make a comment about facts, and I put facts in quotes because, as we know, history has been skewed so much, and the whole relationship that we have with the United States as this great, put this in quotes, great benefactor. And now we're learning more. No, these are different versions of history. And this is what really happened. Because when I ask my students, well, do you know what happened to the Tainos? Do you know about Spain? Do you know what happened to Native Americans in the United States? Do you know their relationship as well as with the United States? Some of them don't know. And I say, well, here's a book for you to read so that you can understand why so many people now, if you go to a Zoom meeting or a Zoom poetry reading, for instance, you'll hear, I'm on the occupied land of, because now people are recognizing this land was stolen from Native Americans. The U.S. government did this.
Yep.
And now people are recognizing, oh, this is what has happened in Puerto Rico. This is the Jones Act. This is why we have such high prices on all our goods, because we don't really have a choice. And even when I was talking to someone and they said, well, I don't understand why whenever you go out to like some of these public places or even some of the private places, but especially the public places, when you see the American flag, the Puerto Rican flag is right next to it. And I said, well, because if you have a Puerto Rican flag, you are supposed to also have right next to it the American flag. And the person didn't know that. And I said, you have to read the history. I said, if you read the history, then you'll understand. And another person said, well, what about the Puerto Rican flag? And I said, there was a part of Puerto Rico in history where the Puerto Rican flag was illegal. If you had it, you really could be in a lot of trouble. So if you read history, the different versions of history, not this like prepackaged, U.S. as the great benefactor history, but if you read other versions of history, then you'll understand the situation that Puerto Rico was in. You'll understand when I talk about the multiple ways of drowning. Then you start understanding, oh, wait a minute, we're drowning in, with the economy. Okay, we're drowning socially. Okay, we're drowning politically. Because some of our leaders are aligned with this Act 60. They're getting profit from people that come here and participate in Act 60. So then you think, well, then who's really fighting for the citizens? Who's really fighting for those that stay and want to stay and really want to help Puerto Rico? It becomes a battle of, how many more ways can we drown? And I always remind my students, hurricane season, it starts in June. It ends in November. We have to be mindful because every time we have another hurricane and it skirts towards Puerto Rico, it's going to make us more vulnerable. Because we have a hurricane, what happens? There are people who are forced to leave. Their jobs close, their homes are gone, they have to leave. And those that stay, well, we try to pick up the pieces, but then you have those that come outside. And what does Naomi Klein always say, about those that come and they prey on disaster capitalism?
Yes.
And that's what we saw after Maria. And that's what we're still seeing after Hurricane Maria. So when I say at the end, how many ways can we drown? The answer, no peeking. It's the cycle that we keep drowning. And even before Hurricane Maria, you remember when we had chikungunya, we had Zika, we had a series of earthquakes, and many people were wondering, well, what is happening with Puerto Rico? What's going on? And now we're in this situation where so many people have said, well, chikungunya, that's gone. Zika's gone. Oh, we have COVID. We still do. Yes, we still do. We have to also think about our medical situation. We have doctors that are leaving, and we have certain, if you go into certain, hospitals for an appointment, right? Because some doctors will say, no, you have to go to the hospital for this test. Well, sometimes it'll take like a month. And then you think a month just to get a test? Really?
Sometimes it takes a month just to get the
just
date.
to get the appointment, right?
Yes. So I want to hold on to a specific topic about the U.S. as the great benefactor, because what I sense is that in that sentence there is a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to whoever believes that to be true.
Well, I hope so. That's why I put that in quotes. I put benefactor in quotes.
So I wanted to hold on to that topic about hypocrisy to lead into our next poem, right? Because by the way, for our listeners, our viewers, this book has a lot of topics. It talks about immigration. It talks about many other topics. But when it comes to hypocrisy, there's this hypocrisy as well. For example, when the U.S. when the 13 colonies expanded, they expanded their civilization. They took the native lands, the lands away from the Native Americans, yet they expanded their civilization. Or, for example, when the British did their colonialism, they expanded their civilization, and it was the Pax Britannica, and it's all great. However, when the U.S. took the half of the territory from Mexico, practically, now if a Mexican comes into the United States, they are illegal immigrants. Now, if it's a white man coming to a black man country, they are expanding civilization. They're bringing civilization. Now, if it's a black man coming to a white man country, then you're called an illegal immigrant. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there, and hypocrisy is a huge problem in our society. And I think it's a topic that's very highlighted on the poem called Decusate, which is the next poem that I like to speak about because it's I don't know, I just like it. I don't have the words to say it. I just like this poem. You have to read it, and I hope you'll read it for our listeners.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Reynaldo.
It's a little bit long.
Yeah, it is a little bit long.
So if you want, just read the first part.
Just read the first part?
The first page.
Yeah.
The first page,
okay,
at
the
least.
first page? Okay.
Yes.
This is called Decusate. I'm not saying violence isn't wrong, but I understand it. Mrs. Hayes is quick to remind us we should never put our hands on anyone. Violence is never the answer. Then she loads the projector. The film crackles on the screen of muskets and canyons, instruments from a war where the 13 colonies gained their freedom by killing men in red. Red like bright breasts of birds, red like big bone leaves on trees. Why couldn't they ask King George for their independence? Carol wants to know, didn't they ask nicely? The film sputter turns to the Civil War and bombards us with red over blue and gray, men getting pummeled and slaves hoping for a quiltwork of freedom. Slaves that never had a prelude of asking nicely. Slaves that swept the dust in breath while masters kneeled them dreamless. Mrs. Hayes has her hands on her hips, like my own mother, when the guidance counselor told her that I would never get accepted by an Ivy League college. Her eyes stripping Mr. Connor to a bare letter. His hands on my mother's shoulders and the firm brushing away of fat fingers.
Okay, so I could start, but I want someone else to start this time because I like
when he starts, he's gonna go on a ramble,
exactly.
and then we're gonna end. This is gonna end with his ramble.
So I don't
Professor,
know.
if you want to start,
Please.
Well, actually, I would rather you start.
well, I love this poem because it reminded me of the fact that Puerto Rico was independent for 3 days. And that fact, most people don't remember that fact in the history. That we asked nicely, Spain, can we be independent? They'd say yes, and suddenly we remembered, this is a deal. This is a deal between the United States and us. Oh, it was a trick. And this poem reminded me of that fact, and it encouraged me to keep learning about that. And I love how you use the red. That red of you imagine, it kind of got to me in the head, imagining that red, the different types of red, and the blood. And the fact that we had to fight, and the fact that when the United States came, they caused of certain wars here internally that we're still paying for them.
Yes, very much so. And the overall hypocrisy that the United States got its freedom, with the 13 colonies fighting, and how we are not in a position to even, have a conversation about our freedom. Every time there's like a referendum, every time there's a push, it's always, oh yeah, okay, well, whatever. And even now with this new political leader taking place in the US, I seriously doubt there's even going to be a one iota of a consideration, especially after that horrendous comment was made about, linking Puerto Rico to trash, even one iota of having Puerto Rico be declared independent.
So about that comment about Puerto Rico being trash, I don't see it so awful because, see, we're better than we were 100 years ago, for example. Now we're called trash. I think that's a step forward from what they thought about us after, 100 years ago. So I don't know if you guys remember this guy, Cornelius Rhodes, the Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, Doctor of Death. So this guy was a pioneer in the research of fighting against cancer. And he went here and he was studying cancer. He was testing. He was making tests. And then this horrendous note linked to the press, and nobody at the moment cared except probably Pedro Albizu Campos was the only one who actually gave it attention. This guy was on the cover of Times magazine. He was he has awards named after him at some point in history. Yet when it comes to the Puerto Ricans, he said, I did my best to further my cause. And what was that cause? He writes in his book that the Puerto Ricans are the dirtiest, laziest, most thievish race on the planet, and that this island doesn't need a public health work. It needs a tidal wave to completely eliminate them all. And he's done his best to further this cause by transplanting cancer into 3 people and several and trying it on several more. Although it didn't have the result. And something like that, it keeps on going, and it's just terrible, just from the start. He said, I want to further my cause, which is, eradicating the Puerto Ricans. So in that sense, we're worse than trash. Trash, you can recycle trash, but you can't recycle what's a dead man. So,
and the fact that
you're doing better now.
The fact that we're an island, it's like the perfect layout to have experiments. It's a social laboratory. Where you can flirt with all these various systems. Not taking into consideration the population in itself. We Puerto Ricans were tested on. Birth control, many drugs and whatnot. So it's
it's horrible.
Exactly.
Another means of oppression.
Yes, it just shows what they truly think of us and some part of the American psyche, because none of them are like that. But we do have a president that brings that kind of people to the big stage. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. I love it how you speak in the poem. You speak about the college. Because right now, most people know, we are college members, right? So when I started doing my college prep essays and all of that, my parents told me, you got to go to the United States. You got to go study outside. You know why? Because you got to take advantage of the fact that they're accepting you Puerto Ricans just because we're a minority. And we're still considered a minority. And when we take the SATs, you can't put Puerto Rico. We're basically a colony, so we have to put we're a colony. And that fact that when you say in the poem that going to college, that for me was so impactful since I'm a student, since I live in the system, and knowing how our system has been completely affected by a completely different system in another country, and we're the ones that are paying for it. And you see not just in the studying system. When you go to the United States, they have top-of-the-notch classrooms. They have boards. They have all the years. They have a lot of investment on them. If you come here, you guys know. You've been to the UPR. You've seen the system. You see the classrooms. You see how there's the lights just hanging from a feather, you know, and that for me it was really impacting since we're not just concentrating on just the government. No, we're concentrating too on our studies. Because our studies are the most important. If the public is dumb, that's where they get us, right?
So I want to go on my rant now because we have like 10 minutes left, and I have to say this. You know, I'm not saying violence isn't wrong, but I understand that. That's probably one of the best phrases that I have read in the book. You know, because here's the thing. We love democracy. I don't think Puerto Rico is a democracy, but we love democracy, and everybody wants democracy. No one's going to argue that democracy isn't good. But the problem is that when we talk about democracy and all those values that we take pride on, you have to think about the French Revolution. And the French Revolution wasn't a pacific revolution. It was a particularly violent one. And when it comes to opposing the monarchy, a lot of people had to die for that to happen. So the things that we enjoy today were because somebody else paid the price 100 years prior before. When it comes to 8-hour work shifts, if we have that today, it's because somebody lost blood on some street fighting for it. And that's something that we take for granted and that we don't understand. So when they come and, you know, prices, let's use the university, for example. The price of credits today is $156 or $57.
Which ones? Which ones?
Yes,
mine are $300 each.
No, that's the graduated credits. Yes.
No, it's my English class was $300.
Oh, well, mine
yeah,
is
but that's 3 credits, exactly.
Exactly,
So
that's a class. That's a full
exactly.
class. And it's more than that. The whole class is $470-something. So here's the thing. In 2006, a credit was $50. When the deans, our deans, the one that our deans today were studying, the credits were $5 or $10. So here's the thing. From 2006 to today, you know, in that span of, it's not even 20 years, actually.
It's like 15 years.
It's like 18 years. It's 18 years.
That's
The price of credits that rise 200%. Yet that doesn't go with the reality of our everyday students and the salaries of the people in Puerto Rico.
And now we need more credits to graduate.
So it's dismantling the university because the community of students now have to work and they become workers who study instead of students who work. And in that sense, it's been breaking us apart. Now, what we are told is that you can't protest because that's a lefty thing. Those are the leftists. You can't protest. That's bad. You have to work hard and you have to do things like Crusoe.
You got to be responsible.
Crusoe, I forgot the name of the full name of the character, but you have to work. You have to work your nails off. Full American hard spirit. And what we forget is that, no, none of that's true. All the rights that we've had wasn't because somebody worked, well, yes, somebody worked hard, but because somebody lost blood to get it. And the fact that we can't do a protest without being said, no, your indifference, I'm sorry that your indifference is making that my protest is making the traffic collapse. But your indifference is making my country collapse.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. We're losing rights. We're losing our access to education, literally the access to education, and we're not allowed to protest. Well, why? We should be doing it. It's the way we gained our rights throughout history. If the Magna Carta occurred, it's because the monarchy had to feel the pressure of the people who wanted the Magna Carta to occur. If the French Revolution happened, if the American Revolution happened, it was because people stood up for their rights, and we have forgotten that that's a thing that we have to do, and that's a duty of every citizen. So any comments, thoughts on that?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. When we look at history, you're absolutely right. I mean, for women, for voting, women said, hey, I want to vote, but they couldn't just ask the government nicely, like, can I have my voting rights, please? No, they had to protest. Same thing for civil rights. They couldn't just say, hey, you know what? I kind of want to have an equal footing for a job or just to sit anywhere on the bus. That didn't happen without going to the streets, without a movement. So when it mentions in the poem, I'm not saying violence isn't wrong, but I understand it. Because what happens in history, violence sometimes happens, and then you see the change that you want.
Sometimes it has to happen.
Because you can't ask nicely. People, unfortunately, they don't always respect that request. They say, oh, you're asking me? Psh, denied. Next. And then you have to say, okay, wait a minute. What then can I do in turn to generate you being uncomfortable, to put that kind of pressure, for you then to say, oh, wait a minute, this is a serious issue now. Now we are compelled. And sometimes it's because of public pressure. Sometimes they are compelled. And sometimes they just realize, okay, the people are going to keep protesting. They're going to keep fighting unless we give them what they want. So then they finally acquiesce and then say, okay, you have what you want. But as far as Puerto Rico goes, look what happened when there was a certain governor. The people then went to the streets and said, we're not happy with you. You have to go. So it's that kind of momentum that I'm hoping people will say, we're not happy with certain situations here in Puerto Rico. We have to have some voices, perhaps coming together. When is the time? The time is now.
Okay, so time's running out. But I want everyone to make one last comment or give a thought or something. I'd like to end with Professor Dorsia Smith. She's our main guest today, so I want to end with her. But I'd like you to begin so we can wrap things up. I think it's been a great conversation.
Okay, so I want to take it back to the whole violence issue. I mean, protesters are accused of sometimes becoming violent, and you see high functionaries saying like, "Oh no, this is a nation of law and order above everything else," as if. But one has to question, where is the real violence coming from? During Maria. I mean, the Fiscal Control Board, with Promesa, which is also another poem that I really enjoyed.
Yes, it's in the book.
Definitely. The earthquakes and the aftershocks and the structures, that were not crumbled, crippled. What else? Let's see. Exactly, the whole thing that took place during the summer of 2019, when you get enough people angry after the mockery of its highest functionaries. And of course, we're also talking about the impact that this pandemic had in society, especially students and whatnot. I don't know. I just think that this poem, has a lot to say. Involving all of these subjects and whatnot. So yeah.
I love this book in general. As I said, Reynaldo asked me yesterday to read the whole book, so to be prepared for today.
Sorry.
And I couldn't stop reading because you use so many details. And when I was reading it, I said, this was written by a Puerto Rican. This couldn't be written by anybody else, because the book is so well written in our perspective, and not just as Puerto Ricans, as students and as a teacher, as a professor in the UPR. You've seen this whole change, and you've seen how it affects the young people, because we are the future of Puerto Rico, right? And in this case, in the violence, we are the ones that have to say, we have to fight. We have to go out. We have to protest, because they're always gonna try to say, no, if you protest, you're gonna be hurt. You're gonna be angry, and we're gonna use that against you. Yeah, you're gonna try. They always try, but that can't limit us. And in the book, we see that how you express wanting to cover up with a Band-Aid a huge hole in our hearts, and it's so amazing for me.
Well, Dorsia, one last thought, because I see the production team is getting kind of cranky.
Oh, final thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, the final thought is thank you so much, Reynaldo and Jaime, for having me here. Thank you to Professor Hector Mercado Susi for joining us. I really enjoy this. And again, the book is called An Inheritance of Drowning. Even though we have inherited so much drowning, we don't have to. So hopefully after you read the book, you'll be ready to join me with a social transformation. The time is now.
That's going to be the name.
Bueno.
Inheritance of Drowning, Learning How to Swim.
Exactly, avoid drowning.
Part two, yes.
Cuando nos tocan de que aprender a nadar, así que ahora volvemos al español para decirle gracias a nuestra audiencia por vernos, gracias aquí a cada uno de nuestros invitados por estar, y para dejar esto aquí claro, creo que ha sido una experiencia magnífica, espero que se vuelva a repetir, traer más invitados, todo. Así que un último mensaje para nuestra audiencia, ¿verdad? Volviendo a ese tema que estábamos tocando. ¿Dónde está la violencia? Cuando una persona muere por falta de acceso a la salud, una salud que se le pudo haber proveído, algo, yo no creo que sea un martirio tener a alguien vivo. ¿Dónde es que está la violencia? Cuando se deja a alguien morir porque le dio cáncer y no tuvo con qué pagar el tratamiento, o cuando alguien sale a protestar porque eso ocurre y necesitamos un cambio. Así que muchas gracias y hasta pronto.